So context, remember, helps us understand the meanings behind the poem, what things were like at the time, and also they are a third of the marks with the poetry section of your GCSE. So this poem was written by John Keats in 1819. He was a well-known romantic poet, and that means that he was not one who strongly backed theories of evolution, of Darwinism. Instead, they celebrated nature, religion, the elements such as land, earth, water, and really ensured that their work had a lot of emotion behind it, not just love and romantic ideas. So that's what we mean by romantic. This poem is an ode. So later on when we talk about form and structure, that is the form, the type of this poem. And an ode is where you write something because you love that object. So in this case, it is an ode to autumn. So he is writing about how much he loves autumn. It is also worth knowing that Keats had a strong fear that he would die and be forgotten, essentially. He was concerned that he would be, that's good, forgotten, that he would not have any kind of legacy to leave behind, that he would just be lost in time. Ironically, he died at the age of 25. And you could say that he avoided his concern, and instead, here we are, however many years later, studying his poems, so he was not forgotten. Haha. So let's go through the poem. They're just some bare bone pieces of context here, and I'm just going to move those out the way so that we can fully annotate the poem. So I'm going to do it in chunks, naturally each stanza going through. If any of the terminology that I use is a little bit confusing, please just get in touch. Remind me, unknown, it's unclear. You could make a link to context there. You could talk about potentially how Keats felt about his life, about death, about the fear of going on to not have a legacy in history. And that is somewhat contrasted with this idea of fruitfulness just here. It's about it, it's not definite. So, close bosom friend of the maturing sun. Now here I'm going to underline close bosom friend. The idea being that close bosom, in the chest, your heart, it is a friend that you hold close. So that means that they have quite a close relationship with one another. And immediately we get the use of personification here. Hearing with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines round the thatch eaves run. I love this word here, conspiring, making plans. Almost sounds quite sly and sinister. Making plans. Again, developing that personification, that they are actually talking, that the sun is him. How to load and bless with fruit. Okay, how they are going to type of imagery. So it's quite picturesque, really. Kind of perfect. To bend with apples the moss cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. Now, I'm just going to circle a couple of verbs that have been used so far. Load, bless, bend, fill. Fruit with ripeness to the core. These words here, if you're noticing the ness, fruitfulness, very what's the word? Very extreme almost. The extremity of it. It's enhancing and exaggerating how rich this season is. To swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells. So further, it keeps going, just like the idea of nature being a circle. Later, flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has overbrimmed their clammy cells. Okay, we've got this idea here of flowers, again very picturesque. Until they think warm days, got the temperature, so warmth, we automatically think of kindness, we think of summer. And for consonants, there's a few examples that might not be obvious to you. Here we've got the repetition of the same F sound, f, f, fill or fruit. We've also got the S, and coincidentally the W as well. We've got the sw, sw. Okay, so those would be examples of consonants. I'm just going to use fill or fruit for the moment. Now, a few of you might be thinking, but there's a word in between. And for this one, they're actually a little bit further apart. It's the repetition of a sound is usually 9 times out of 10, it's intentional. And here, this fill or fruit sound, it's a forceful sound, actually forcing air out as you say it. So you could argue that Keats had a food store, a grain store, back when they would keep all of the grain, all of the crops kind of in a particular place. And so this rhetorical question, remember a question that does not necessarily need an answer, is asking the reader directly, have you not seen autumn? Have you not seen them beside the grain store? And obviously, essentially, that it's a very natural action for this person of autumn to be doing. On a granary floor. Now, granary is, obviously, I always think of bread, but thinking about grain, about kind of wholeness. So, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind. So we've got an example again of alliteration, but also of consonants here. So I'm just going to circle that. It's very calm, it's not rushing for anything. You could link that into a lot of the colours that are used. It's very soft hues, it's not harsh. The weather isn't harsh either. Drowsed with the fume of poppies. I love this part because Keats did use opium during this time, opium being the drug, essentially, opiate being from the centre of poppy flowers, and from that we now, all thy hook spares the next swathe and all its twined flowers. Here, by hook, we're talking about obviously like a scythe or a kind of tool used for collecting crops, and swathe for that matter. Here, nowadays we tend to spell it with an E on the end, is actually the next kind of harvest, the next collection of seeds, of crops, and all its twined flowers. Here, that idea of twined, that tooth is staying behind, is staying steady. There's no rush again. It's very laid back and patient, almost enjoying its time. Laden head, obviously laying down, is heavy. Across a brook, we've got that small river. Again, this picturesque autumn scene. So moving down the poem. Or by a cider press, cider being from apples. Again, this idea of fruitfulness, of the idea that it's harvest time, linked directly with this idea that autumn is watching these hours go by, almost as though they are aware that winter is coming and their time is nearly up. Where are the songs of spring? A, where are they? So, songs of spring, we've got that consonance again. We've also got sibilants, obviously, because it's the S sound. We've got here a rhetorical question. And here, for example, we're going to be using the sense of hearing. So, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day. We've got that adjective there, that's soft, which would link directly to a sound, absolutely. But you've got that huge kind of oxymoron there, that it's dying at the same time. So I'm just going to put a different colour actually. I'm going to put oxymoron. Two things that are often, that's stubble. That's something that once hair has been cut, that's something that returns, that kind of short, prickly feeling. And here, the stubble plains, it's almost as though the earth has stubble, so it could be personification there. Because the crops have been harvested, they've gone. So now we've only got these short, spiky, prickly kind of stalks left in the field. Yet that's contrasted with rosy hue. Hue is like a colour, I'm sure you might know it from things like these are mourning, they are grieving. And you could say that's because gnats have a very, very short lifespan, so they're about to die, essentially, but also maybe missing that kind of warm, longer days that they've been used to. They know what's coming, so it could be a sense there of kind of foreshadowing or foreboding, sorry. Something bad's going to happen, which is winter in this sense. Among the river sallows, lambs rather than just sheep, is because we're remembering the spring. We're remembering that lambs who had been born are now fully grown. Time has passed. Could loud bleat from hilly bourne. So again, we've got another sound there. Hedge crickets sing. We've got that singing there. We also had the choir up there. And now with treble soft, so migrate, is it migrate? Emigrate? Fly south for the winter, essentially. So here they're kind of preparing to leave. So by the end of the poem, we've reached the end of the season. End of the season. Okay, last few things to go through then. Rhyme scheme. Now, remember, to get a rhyme scheme, you don't need to do every single line of the poem, because that would be ridiculous. Having a look in this last stanza, for example, way back here to see, soft, rhymes with aloft, croft is the same, and skies. Okay, we've got to go all the way back to dies. So, A, B, C, D, E, C, D, D, E. Okay, easiest way to remember that is you've essentially got something like that, where you've got 4 and 7. I hope that's been okay. I'll be in touch very soon. So you can see here I've put 2 words by the side. I'm going to talk about these in a second. But first, just here, this metaphor, because clearly they aren't actually clammy cells, this metaphor really emphasizes the heat, that idea that it's not actually pleasant, it's quite humid, potentially sticky, the idea of it's clammy. And cell, this use of this noun cell describes that actually it appears a little bit like a prison. On the one hand, you could think therefore that autumn is providing them with some kind of relief, of freedom, because summer has essentially made it this really disgusting little place. On the other hand, though, you could think that it's not going to be enjoyable because they're already in these over-brimmed, these prison cells that are kind of filled up to the max. Over here, I've got two words, consonants and alliteration. Now, I'm hoping you've heard of one of these. Alliteration, obviously, where two things begin with the same letter in sequence. Would help if I spelt it right, wouldn't it? You can also see that I've made a really nice little mistake here, so I do apologise. On the other hand, consonants, something like, would help if I'd spotted it out,